There is a special kind of betrayal when the man you love brings another woman into your bed. But there is a monumental, almost comical kind of stupidity when he does it in a house you secretly own, in a neighborhood you built, managed by staff who report directly to your private trust. Darien thought he was the undisputed king of his castle. He believed his six-figure architect salary made him the untouchable provider, the savior of his supposedly middle-class wife. He didn't know that the very ground he walked on, the walls that hid his affairs, and the bank that held his mortgage, all answered to the quiet woman he was throwing away. This is the story of the ultimate eviction. Sylvia Kensington did not look like a woman who could buy and sell half of Boston before breakfast. She drove a 4-year-old Volvo, bought her sweaters on sale at Nordstrom, and worked a quiet job as an independent financial consultant. To the rest of the world, and most importantly, to her husband, Darien Miller, she was a supportive, deeply average woman making a modest $60,000 a year. Darien, on the other hand, was a senior architect at Harris & Partners, a prestigious firm downtown. He made $250,000 a year, drove a leased Porsche Macan, and wore custom-tailored suits. He was a man obsessed with appearances, climbing the social ladder and being perceived as the alpha provider. What Darien didn't know was that Sylvia was the sole heir to Kensington Holdings, a generational real estate empire that owned commercial high-rises, luxury residential complexes, and entire blocks of historic Beacon Hill. Sylvia's grandfather had raised her with a strict philosophy: wealth is a target on your back. Hide it until you know who your real friends are. When Sylvia met Darien 7 years ago, he was a struggling junior draftsman pulling all-nighters. She was volunteering at a local community center pretending to be a regular graduate student. She fell in love with his ambition, his late-night rants about modern architecture, and the way he looked at her as if she were his safe harbor. For the first few years, it was a genuine, beautiful struggle. But as Darien's salary grew, so did his ego. The first major lie of their marriage wasn't an affair, it was the house. 3 years into their marriage, Darien decided they needed to upgrade from their apartment to a home that reflected his new status as a senior architect. He had his eye on a stunning, 4-story historic townhouse on Wellington Street. It featured original crown molding, a private courtyard, and a staggering price tag of $4.2 million. Darien was devastated when his mortgage broker told him he couldn't afford it. Sylvia couldn't bear to see him so crushed. Behind the scenes, she made a phone call to Richard Sterling, her family's wealth manager and chief legal counsel. "Richard, I want the Wellington property," Sylvia had said, staring out the window of their cramped apartment. "But Darien needs to think he bought it. Have the holding company list it for a distressed short sale. Price it at $1.1 million and ensure the seller's agent specifically reaches out to Darien." 2 weeks later, Darien burst through the door, uncorking a bottle of champagne. "Sylvia, you will not believe the deal I just negotiated," he shouted, his chest puffed out with pride. "The owner is going bankrupt, and I talked them down to $1.1 million. I'm the sole name on the mortgage since my credit is better, but babe, I bought us a mansion." Sylvia smiled, sipping the champagne, letting him have the victory. She didn't tell him that her holding company had absorbed the $3.1 million loss, or that the monthly HOA fees he proudly paid went directly into a bank account she controlled. She let him be the hero. For a while it was perfect. But power and perceived wealth do strange things to a fragile ego. As Darien grew more successful at work, his attitude at home shifted. It became condescending. He started making offhand comments about how he was carrying the financial weight of the household. When Sylvia suggested they go on a simple hiking trip for their anniversary, Darien scoffed. "Sylvia, I don't work 90-hour weeks to sleep in a tent," he had said, adjusting his Rolex. I'll book us a suite in Kabul. Don't worry about the cost, I've got it covered. You just keep focusing on your little consulting spreadsheets." Sylvia swallowed the insult. She loved him, and she rationalized that his stressful job was causing this newfound arrogance. She wanted a normal marriage, free from the paranoia of gold diggers that had plagued her father's life. She thought her secret was protecting their love. She had no idea it was merely providing the stage for his betrayal. The shift in Darien's behavior was gradual, then sudden. In the 5th year of their marriage, the red flags began to unfurl with violent color. It started with the gym. Darien, who previously considered walking to the fridge a workout, suddenly hired a personal trainer and began spending 3 hours every evening lifting and networking. Then came the passwords. His phone, which used to lie face up on the kitchen island, was now glued to his hand, protected by a new alphanumeric passcode. Finally, there was the cologne-heavy, expensive Tom Ford scent that he only applied before leaving for the office in the morning. Sylvia was deeply perceptive. You do not manage a multi-million-dollar corporate portfolio by ignoring the details. She knew something was wrong, but part of her was paralyzed by the fear of blowing up her carefully constructed life. The breaking point arrived on a rainy Thursday in October. Darien announced he was hosting an impromptu dinner party for the senior partners at his firm to celebrate a newly secured contract. "I need everything perfect, Sylvia," he barked, pacing the hardwood floors of the Weddington townhouse. "Catered food, vintage wine, and dressed nicely. My new junior designer is coming. She was instrumental in the pitch, and I want her to feel welcome." That evening, Sylvia wore a simple but elegant black dress. She played the role of the dutiful, quiet wife flawlessly as the architects filed in. Then Darien walked through the door with her. Chloe Reynolds was 24, with striking blonde hair, sharp features, and an aura of supreme unearned confidence. She was wearing a pair of red-soled Christian Louboutin heels and a silk dress that cost more than a junior designer's monthly rent. Sylvia recognized the dress immediately. It was from a boutique downtown where she held a silent partnership. "Sylvia, this is Chloe," Darien said, his hand lingering just a fraction of a second too long on the small of Chloe's back. "The prodigy of our firm." "Nice to meet you," Chloe said, her eyes sweeping over Sylvia with thinly veiled pity. Her gaze then moved to the soaring ceilings and the custom wainscoting of the foyer. "Darien told me he practically stole this place. It's gorgeous, though the decor is a bit dated, very suburban, Mom." Sylvia felt a cold spike of adrenaline hit her chest. The decor, antique Persian rugs, authentic mid-century modern furniture, and original oil paintings was curated from the Kensington family vaults. It was worth more than Chloe's entire projected lifetime earnings. "I like to keep things comfortable," Sylvia replied evenly, offering a polite smile. Throughout dinner, the dynamic was sickeningly clear to anyone paying attention. Chloe sat to Darien's right, laughing too loudly at his jokes, lightly touching his forearm to emphasize a point. Darien looked at her like a starving man looking at a feast. He hung on her every word. At one point, the conversation shifted to real estate. One of the senior partners complimented the townhouse again. "It really is a marvel, Darien," the partner said. "To own property free and clear in Beacon Hill is the dream." Darien leaned back, swirling his Cabernet. "It takes grit, long hours. You have to be willing to take risks. Honestly, it's a lot of pressure being the sole provider, but being able to provide a roof like this for Sylvia makes it worth it." He offered Sylvia a patronizing smile. She does her best to keep it tidy. Under the table, Sylvia's hands clenched into fists so tight her fingernails cut into her palms. Chloe chimed in, swirling her wine glass. "Well, if this were my house, I'd gut the living room, tear out that old fireplace, bring in some stark marble, maybe some neon accents, Make it modern. Right now, it feels like I'm eating dinner in a museum. That's a brilliant vision, Chloe, Darien beamed. Maybe I'll let you lead the redesign when I finally get around to updating this place. Sylvia sat silently, chewing her food. She didn't cause a scene. She didn't throw her wine in Chloe's face. Instead, the warm, loving heart she had guarded for so long snapped completely shut. The woman sitting at the head of the table was no longer Darien's meek, financially dependent wife. She was Sylvia Kensington, CEO of a ruthless real estate empire. If it were your house, Chloe, Sylvia thought, taking a slow sip of her water. Let's see how you handle living in my house. After the guests left, Sylvia went to her private home office and locked the door. She opened her encrypted laptop and bypassed the firewall into her trust's private banking network. She pulled up the joint accounts she shared with Darien. Then she pulled up Darien's private hidden credit card, the one she had easily discovered weeks ago using a private investigator her lawyer retained. The statements told the whole story. Hotel rooms at the Four Seasons, jewelry from Tiffany's, and the Christian Louboutin heels Chloe had worn that very night. Darien had been funding his affair using a line of credit backed by the equity of the house. The house that Sylvia technically owned. Sylvia picked up her phone and dialed a number. It rang once. "Richard," Sylvia said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. "Good evening, Mrs. Kensington. It's late. Is everything all right?" her lawyer replied. "I need you to prepare an eviction notice," Sylvia commanded, staring at the blinking cursor on her screen. "And a divorce petition. But hold them. Do not file them yet. I need to take a little business trip first. I want to see exactly how much rope Darien is willing to hang himself with." 2 weeks later, Sylvia packed a modest rolling suitcase and walked into the kitchen, where Darien was aggressively blending a protein shake. "I'm heading to the airport," Sylvia said, her voice light and casual. "My client in Seattle needs me on site for a bookkeeping audit. It's a mess. I'll be gone for exactly 8 days. In reality, Sylvia was flying to Switzerland to sign off on a $500 million commercial acquisition, but Darien didn't even look up from his phone. "Right, the Seattle thing," Darien mumbled, barely concealing the sudden eager spark in his eyes. "Have a safe flight. Don't worry about me. I'll probably just be working late at the firm all week anyway." He didn't offer to drive her to the airport. He didn't kiss her goodbye. Sylvia took a rideshare to Logan International, boarded her first-class flight to Geneva, and waited. She didn't have to wait long. The Wellington Street townhouse, being a historic and highly valuable asset in the Kensington Holdings portfolio, was equipped with state-of-the-art security systems. While there were no cameras inside the private living spaces, Sylvia valued her own privacy. The exterior, the front stoop, the rear courtyard, and the secure garage were heavily monitored. Sylvia had full access to the live feeds through a secure app on her iPad. Just 4 hours after her plane took off, Sylvia sat in her luxury hotel suite in Geneva, a cup of Earl Grey tea in hand, watching the live feed from her own front door. An Uber Black pulled up to the curb. Out stepped Chloe Reynolds. She wasn't carrying a small overnight bag. She was dragging 3 massive luxury suitcases and 2 garment bags. Darien rushed out the front door, grinning like a teenager, and practically carried Chloe and her luggage over the threshold. Sylvia watched them kiss passionately on her front step before the heavy oak door swung shut. The audacity was breathtaking. Darien hadn't just brought his mistress over for a quick tryst. He was moving her in the moment his wife was out of the state. Over the next 4 days, Sylvia conducted her high-stakes international business meetings during the day. But her evenings were spent monitoring the digital footprint of Darien's absolute destruction. On day 2, Richard Sterling called her on an encrypted line. "Sylvia," the lawyer said, a rare hint of disbelief in his usually stoic voice. "I'm looking at the alerts on the property's secondary trust accounts. Darien just tried to authorize a $45,000 charge to a contemporary Italian furniture importer. Because the charge was linked to the home's equity line, which technically runs through our holding company, it flagged for my approval." Sylvia closed her eyes. "She is gutting my living room." "Did you approve it, Richard?" "Of course not. I declined it, citing suspicious activity. But he bypassed it. He just maxed out his personal American Express to pay for it. He's bleeding himself dry." "Let him," Sylvia said coldly. "What else?" "He hired a junk removal service," Richard read from a report. "They arrived at the property this morning." Sylvia quickly opened the courtyard camera feed. The footage from earlier that day showed two men in overalls carrying out Sylvia's possessions. A favorite reading chair, the antique side tables she had inherited from her grandmother, a box of her winter clothes. They were throwing it all into a dump truck. Darien was literally erasing her from the house. He was letting a 24-year-old girl clear out her life to make room for neon accents and stark marble. A quiet, terrifying rage settled over Sylvia. She didn't cry. The tears had been burned away by the sheer disrespect of the man she had loved. Now it was purely a business transaction, and Darien had just made the worst investment of his life. "Richard," Sylvia said, her voice dropping an octave. "The house, who is listed as the official owner on the city registry, technically Wellington Property Management LLC, which is a subsidiary of Kensington Holdings," Richard replied. "Darien's name is only on the mortgage, which is held by a private bank that you own the majority shares in. He thinks he owns the house because he pays the mortgage to the bank, but legally he is just a tenant with a highly unusual rent-to-own structure that he never read the fine print on. The deed belongs to you." "Good. Here is what we are going to do," Sylvia instructed, pacing the floor of her Geneva hotel room overlooking the Alps. "I want you to draft a formal notice of immediate eviction for both Darien Miller and Chloe Reynolds. Grounds: severe violation of property management guidelines, unauthorized subletting, and destruction of historic property. It shall be done by noon," Richard said. "But Sylvia, the moment you serve this, the illusion is gone. He will know everything." "I want him to know everything," Sylvia whispered fiercely. "I want him to feel the exact moment his entire reality shatters. I want him to look at the woman he thought was a penniless charity case and realize she holds the deed to his life." Sylvia changed her flight. She wasn't staying in Geneva for the full 8 days. She was going home early. On the evening of the 6th day, the sun was setting over Boston, casting long, golden shadows across the cobblestones of Beacon Hill. The street was quiet, lined with expensive cars and manicured trees. Sylvia stood on the sidewalk directly across from the Wellington townhouse. She wore a sharp, tailored white suit, a stark contrast to the sale rack sweaters Darien was used to seeing her in. Her hair was pulled back, her posture impeccable. Flanking her stood Richard Sterling, clutching a leather briefcase, and two large, unsmiling men wearing the uniform of a premier private security firm. Through the massive bay windows of the townhouse, the interior lights blazed. Sylvia could see the silhouettes moving inside. She could see the hideous modern floor lamps Chloe had brought in. She could see Darien pouring wine in the kitchen, laughing. They were playing house in a castle that belonged to the queen they had banished. Sylvia checked her Rolex, a real one, a family heirloom that she usually kept locked in a vault. It was 7 p.m. "Are the police on standby?" Sylvia asked without taking her eyes off the window. "A cruiser is parked 2 streets down," Richard confirmed. "Just in case Mr. Miller decides to become uncooperative." "He won't," Sylvia said, a cold, predatory smile finally breaking across her face. "Darien's entire existence relies on looking put together in front of his peers and his mistress. When he realizes what is happening, he won't fight. He will break. She took a deep breath of the crisp, awesome air, feeling more alive than she had in 7 years. "All right, Richard," Sylvia commanded, stepping off the curb and walking toward her front door. "Let's go ruin his life." Sylvia did not knock. She did not ring the heavy brass doorbell. She reached into her tailored blazer, produced a heavy master skeleton key, the one she had retained from the original Kensington vault, and slid it into the lock. It turned with a satisfying, heavy click. She pushed the door open. The immediate sensory assault of the house almost made her stumble. The subtle, comforting scent of sandalwood and old books that usually permeated the townhouse had been completely eradicated, replaced by a cloying, overwhelmingly sweet floral diffuser. The antique Persian rug in the foyer, an 18th century silk masterpiece, was gone. In its place was a stark, cheap, geometric print rug. Sylvia stepped into her home, her heels clicking sharply against the original hardwood floors. Richard Sterling followed closely behind, his face an emotionless mask, with the 2 towering security contractors flanking them like shadows. "Babe, did the sushi arrive already?" Darien's voice called out from the kitchen. "I thought the app said 20 minutes. Darien walked out into the hallway holding a crystal wine glass, a wedding gift from her godfather. He was wearing his expensive cashmere loungewear, looking every bit the relaxed king of his castle. When he saw Sylvia standing there, framed by 2 massive men in dark suits, he stopped dead in his tracks. The wine glass tilted, spilling a few drops of expensive red onto the new rug. The color drained from his face so quickly he looked ill. "Sylvia!" he choked out, his eyes darting frantically between her pristine white suit and the security guards. What are you doing here?" "You're in Seattle. My audit concluded early," Sylvia said, her voice smooth and devoid of any warmth. "I decided to come home." Imagine my surprise to find a junk removal truck logged in our security footage carting away my grandmother's side tables. Darien's mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on dry land. The arrogant, condescending architect who had mocked her for a week was suddenly gone. Panic set in. He took a step forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Sylvia, sweetheart, listen, I can explain. The house. I was just surprising you with a remodel." "And He trailed off, his eyes darting toward the winding mahogany staircase. "Darien?" "Who is at the door?" The voice drifted down from the 2nd floor. A moment later, Chloe Reynolds appeared at the landing. She was wearing Sylvia's custom silk La Perla robe, a gift Sylvia had bought for herself in Milan. The robe was far too long for Chloe, trailing on the floor, but she wore it with an unbearable smugness. Chloe froze when she saw the crowd in the foyer. Her smugness melted into confusion and annoyance. "What is she doing here?" Chloe demanded, tightening the sash of Sylvia's robe. "Darien, you told me she was gone for the week. And who are these men?" Sylvia didn't even look at Chloe. She kept her dead, unblinking gaze locked on her husband. "I brought my attorney, Darien, and private security," Sylvia stated calmly, "because I am removing a pest infestation from my property." Darien's panic briefly flared into defensive anger. His ego, fragile and desperately trying to reassert itself in front of his mistress, kicked in. He set his wine glass down on the console table and stood up straighter. "Have you lost your mind, Sylvia?" Darien snapped, his voice echoing in the high-ceilinged hallway. "You bring muscle into my house? You come back early to spy on me and think you can throw me out. Let's get one thing straight. I pay the mortgage. My name is on the deed. I bought this house. If anyone is leaving, it's you. You can pack your cheap sweaters and get out." Sylvia didn't flinch. She simply turned her head slightly. "Richard, Proceed. Richard Sterling stepped forward, opening his leather briefcase with a sharp snap. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, bound in heavy blue card stock, and held them out to Darien. "Mr. Miller," Richard began, his tone polite but entirely devoid of respect. "I am Richard Sterling, Chief Legal Counsel for Kensington Holdings. I am serving you with a formal notice of immediate eviction, a cease and desist order regarding property damage, and a notice of default on your residential agreement." Darien laughed. It was a high, nervous sound. He didn't take the papers. Kensington Holdings? The billionaire commercial developers? What the hell do they have to do with my mortgage? "I bought this from a distressed seller." "You didn't buy anything, Darien," Sylvia said softly. The quietness of her voice commanded the room. "You signed a highly specialized, heavily subsidized rent-to-own lease agreement masquerading as a mortgage. An agreement structured by a private bank." "Yes, Boston Liberty Bank," Darien argued, his face flushing red. "I pay them $6,000 a month. Boston Liberty Bank is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Kensington Family Trust," Richard clarified, stepping closer and practically forcing the documents into Darien's hands. "Furthermore, the distressed seller you supposedly negotiated with was Wellington Property Management LLC, another subsidiary of the trust. You never owned this property, Mr. Miller. You were a glorified tenant, permitted to live here under a strict morality and maintenance clause which you have spectacularly breached." Darien stared at the papers in his hands. The heavy, embossed seal of Kensington Holdings stared back at him. His brain was desperately trying to connect the dots, trying to reconcile a massive multi-billion-dollar corporate entity with the woman standing in front of him who clipped coupons for groceries. "I don't understand," Darien stammered, looking at Sylvia. Why is a billionaire trust involved in our house?" Sylvia took a slow, deliberate step forward. The air in the room felt as though it had dropped 10 degrees. "Because, Darien," she said, her eyes flashing with years of suppressed power, "I am Sylvia Kensington. My grandfather built the firm you work for. My father built the bank that holds your fake mortgage. And I own the very ground you are standing on." The silence in the foyer was absolute. It was the sound of a man's entire universe collapsing in on itself. "You're lying," Chloe's voice sliced through the silence. The mistress marched down the remaining stairs, practically tripping over the hem of the stolen robe. She marched up to Darien, pointing a manicured finger at Sylvia. "Darien, she's bluffing. Look at her. She drives a 10-year-old Volvo. She works as a freelance bookkeeper. This is some pathetic scam to scare us because she's jealous," Chloe sneered, looking Sylvia up and down with utter contempt. "You can't fake being a Kensington. Everyone knows the Kensington heir is a private socialite who lives in Europe. I split my time between Geneva and Boston, actually," Sylvia replied smoothly. She finally shifted her gaze to Chloe. "And I would ask that you take off my custom La Perla robe. But considering your cheap perfume has completely permeated the silk, you can keep it. I'll add the $2,500 retail cost to the debt Mr. Miller currently owes me." Darien was trembling. He looked from the eviction notice to Richard's stoic face and finally to Sylvia. The reality of the past 7 years was crashing down on him. The subsidized rent, the lucky breaks he had received at his firm. The fact that Sylvia never seemed stressed about money, only about his behavior. "Sylvia, is this true?" Darien whispered, his voice cracking. "All this time, you let me pay the mortgage. You let me think I was providing for us." "I let you be the man you desperately wanted to be, Darien," Sylvia said, her tone filled with cold disgust. "I hid my wealth because I wanted a partner who loved me, not for my portfolio. I watched you puff out your chest. I listened to you belittle me. I watched you use the money you saved because I was secretly subsidizing your entire lifestyle to buy flashy cars and impress junior designers at your firm. Sylvia gestured vaguely at the hideous new rug and the empty space where her grandmother's tables used to be. And how did you repay my protection? You maxed out your personal credit cards to fund an affair. You moved a child into my home. And you threw away my family heirlooms. Sylvia stepped closer to Darien, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Did you really think a senior architect's salary could afford a $4.2 million historic property in Beacon Hill? You're not a king, Darien. You're a clown. And your circus is closed. Chloe, realizing the gravity of the situation, turned on Darien. Wait, Chloe said, her voice rising in panic. What does she mean you maxed out your credit cards? You told me you had millions in equity. You told me you were going to gut this place and put my name on the deed. Darien couldn't look at her. He buried his face in his hands. Chloe, shut up for a second. Please. Don't tell me to shut up, Chloe shrieked. She turned to Richard. He bought me a $15,000 diamond tennis bracelet yesterday. Does he not have the money? Richard adjusted his glasses. According to the financial sweep we conducted this afternoon, Mr. Mistress, Miller has approximately $84,000 in revolving credit card debt, primarily accumulated over the last 6 months. He also has zero equity in this property. He is, by all financial metrics, completely insolvent. Chloe let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. The illusion of her rich, older sugar daddy had vanished. She was staring at a middle-aged man, drowning in debt. You broke loser, she screamed at Darien, slapping him hard across the shoulder. You lied to me. You're poor. Security, Sylvia said, snapping her fingers. The two massive men stepped forward instantly, closing the distance between the door and the cheating couple. You have exactly 30 minutes to pack whatever items you brought into this house, Sylvia commanded. You will not take a single towel, a single fork, or a single piece of furniture that belongs to this property. If you attempt to steal anything, my men will restrain you, and the police parked at the end of the block will arrest you for grand larceny. Darien looked up, tears streaming down his face. His arrogance was completely shattered. Sylvia, please. We've been married for 7 years. You can't just throw me out on the street. Where am I supposed to go? I can't afford a hotel right now. Please, let's talk about this. We are done talking, Sylvia said, turning her back on him. 30 minutes. The clock is ticking. The next half hour was a masterclass in humiliation. Sylvia stood in the foyer, her arms crossed, as Darien and Chloe scrambled through the house like panicked rats. The dynamic between the lovers had completely toxified. Chloe screamed at Darien the entire time they packed, tossing his expensive suits into garbage bags when they ran out of suitcase space. She blamed him for ruining her life, for lying to her, and for making her a participant in this disaster. Darien, broken and sobbing, tried to apologize, begging her to stay with him, promising he would work double shifts at the firm to make it up to her. Sylvia listened to the pathetic display from the bottom of the stairs. It was sad, really. She had once loved this man deeply. She had built an entire false reality just to protect his pride, and he had traded a kingdom for a fleeting moment of ego with a girl who despised him the second his wallet ran dry. At exactly the 29-minute mark, Darien and Chloe dragged their luggage down the stairs. Chloe didn't even look at Darien. She shoved past the security guards, dragging her 3 luxury suitcases. Now a stark reminder of the debt Darien was carrying out the front door and down the steps. I'm calling an Uber, Chloe spat over her shoulder. Don't ever contact me again, Darien. You're pathetic. Darien stood in the doorway, clutching 2 duffel bags. He looked around the grand foyer of the home he thought he owned, taking in the crown molding, the soaring ceilings, and finally, his wife. Sylvia, he pleaded one last time, his voice a hoarse whisper. I lost everything, please. Sylvia looked at him, her face completely unreadable. No, Darien, she corrected him quietly. You threw it away. Leave my key on the console table. Trembling, Darien reached into his pocket, pulled out the heavy brass key and set it down. He turned around and walked out into the chilly Boston evening. As the heavy oak door swung shut, locking with a definitive thud, the silence returned to the house. It wasn't the warm silence of a shared home anymore, but the cold, sterile silence of a corporate asset. Sylvia walked over to the console table and picked up the key. Richard, she said, not looking back at the lawyer. Yes, Miss Kensington. Call a cleaning crew. Have them scrub every inch of this house. Tear up this cheap rug and burn it. Sylvia walked over to the bay window, watching Darien trudge down the sidewalk, dragging his bags, utterly alone. And on Monday morning, I want you to set up a meeting with the senior partners at Harrison and Partners. It's time we reviewed our architectural contract, Sylvia smiled. The eviction from the house was just the beginning. By Monday, Darien Miller was going to learn what it truly meant to be unemployed by your own wife. The weekend was a master class in swift, unforgiving reality for Darien Miller. He spent Friday and Saturday night sleeping in the driver's seat of his leased Porsche Macan, parked in the lot of a 24-hour grocery store. His $250,000 salary certainly felt like monopoly money when stacked against maxed-out credit cards, frozen joint accounts, and a complete lack of liquid cash. He had tried to check into a hotel on Sunday, only to have 3 different cards decline at the front desk. By Monday morning, the cracks in his pristine facade were impossible to hide. His custom-tailored Tom Ford suit was severely wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot, and despite a miserable shower at a local YMCA, he reeked of desperation and cheap soap. He arrived at Harrison and Partners at 8 a.m., desperate to throw himself into his work. The firm occupied the top 3 floors of the prestigious glass and steel monolith known as the Apex Tower. It was the only place left where Darien was still somebody. He was still a senior partner. He still had power. As he stepped off the elevator, the atmosphere in the office was unusually frantic. Junior draftsmen were sprinting down the halls of blueprints, and the executive assistants looked pale. Darien spotted Chloe near the espresso machine. She looked flawless in a sharp navy blazer, acting as if the catastrophic events of Friday night had never happened. Darien rushed over to her. Chloe, please, he whispered, grabbing her arm. We need to talk. I can fix this. I have a major commission bonus coming up next quarter. I'll get us an apartment. Chloe violently yanked her arm away, looking at him with utter revulsion. Don't touch me, Darien, and don't speak to me unless it's about the Miller Grind project. You are toxic waste right now. I've already spoken to HR. I told them you coerced me into a relationship using your seniority. I am a victim of your workplace harassment. Darien stumbled back, as if he had been physically struck. You told HR I coerced you? We were looking at engagement rings on Thursday. That was before I knew you were a broke fraud, Chloe hissed, her eyes narrowing. Stay away from me. Adrian wants to see you in the main conference room at 10 sharp. It's an all-hands senior meeting. The principal reps for our biggest corporate account are coming in for an emergency audit. Darien swallowed hard. The Kensington account. It was the golden goose of Harrison and Partners. Over 60% of the firm's annual revenue came from designing commercial spaces and luxury high-rises for Kensington Holdings. Whoever managed that account held the keys to the firm's future. At 9:55 a.m., Darien walked into the glass-walled boardroom. The massive mahogany table was surrounded by the firm's elite. Adrian Harrison, the founding partner and CEO, sat at the head of the table, sweating profusely into his collar. Gregory Schmidt, The CFO was furiously typing on a laptop. Chloe was sitting near the back, trying to look indispensable. "Take a seat, Darien," Adrian commanded, his voice tight with anxiety. "And pull yourself together. You look like you slept in a dumpster. The CEO of Kensington Holdings is arriving personally. We have no idea why they called this emergency audit, but if we lose this account, we are bankrupt by Christmas." At exactly 10:10 a.m., the heavy glass doors to the boardroom swung open. Darien's heart stopped. Sylvia walked in. She was flanked by Richard Sterling and 3 other corporate attorneys, carrying thick, leather-bound portfolios. But this was not the Sylvia who baked banana bread and balanced his checkbook. This was Sylvia Kensington, wearing a charcoal grey Armani pantsuit, a pair of subtle but devastatingly expensive diamond studs, and the cold, unyielding expression of an apex predator. Adrian Harrison practically leaped out of his chair. "Miss Kensington, what an absolute honor. We didn't realize you were the new acting CEO of the holding group. Please, sit." Sylvia ignored Adrian's outstretched hand. She stood at the opposite end of the table, her piercing gaze sweeping the room until it locked onto Darien. Darren was paralyzed. He felt the blood drain from his head. He tried to speak, but only a pathetic, raspy squeak escaped his throat. "Adrian," Sylvia began, her voice ringing out with terrifying authority. "Sit down. We are not here to exchange pleasantries. We are here to perform a surgical extraction." Adrian slowly sat down, exchanging a terrified look with Gregory. "Extraction? I don't understand, Miss Kensington. Is there a problem with the new downtown plaza designs?" "The designs are adequate," Sylvia replied, motioning for Richard to distribute the portfolios. "The problem lies in your firm's catastrophic failure to monitor your senior staff's ethical and financial compliance. A failure that has directly compromised my family's trust." Sylvia opened her folder. "Let's review the expense reports of your senior architect, Darien Miller." Every head in the room swiveled toward Darien. Chloe shrank down in her chair, suddenly looking very small. "Over the past 6 months," Sylvia stated, reading from the ledger, "Mr. Miller has expensed approximately $42,000 to the firm's corporate account under the billing code Client Acquisition Kensington Holdings. These expenses include multiple weekend stays at the Four Seasons, thousands of dollars in vintage champagne at the Capitol Grill, and private spa retreats." Adrian looked at Darien, completely bewildered. "Darien? We authorized those expenses because you claimed you were entertaining the regional directors of the Kensington Trust. You said you were securing the next phase of the waterfront project." "He wasn't entertaining my directors," Sylvia said, her voice dripping with venom. "He was entertaining his subordinate." Sylvia pointed a manicured finger directly at Chloe. "He was funding an extramarital affair with a junior designer, billing it to your firm, and falsely attaching my company's name to the fraudulent charges." Chaos erupted in the boardroom. Gregory Schmidt slammed his hands on the table. "Fraud? Darien, are you out of your mind? You used the Kensington billing code for your mistress?" Darien was hyperventilating. "Sylvia, please, don't do this here," he begged, tears welling in his eyes. "Not in front of everyone." "I am not Sylvia, your wife today, Darien," she replied coldly. "I am Sylvia Kensington, your firm's majority shareholder and primary client. And you stole from me." Sylvia turned her attention back to Adrian. "Mr. Harrison, my trust maintains a strict morality and anti-corruption clause in all our vendor contracts. Darien Miller has committed corporate fraud using my company's name. Furthermore, he has engaged in gross nepotism by elevating Miss Reynolds, whose architectural portfolio is frankly amateur at best, to a senior project team to keep her close." Chloe jumped up from her chair, her face flushed red. "That is a lie. I earned my spot. Darien manipulated me. I didn't know he was expensing those dinners." Sylvia didn't even blink. "Miss Reynolds, We pulled the receipt from the jewelry store where Mr. Carthen. Miller bought you a $15,000 tennis bracelet last Thursday. It was purchased at 2:30 p.m., a time when your timesheet indicates you were both supposedly on a site visit for my plaza project. You are an accomplice to time theft and corporate embezzlement. Sylvia closed the folder with a loud, definitive snap. Here is my ultimatum, Adrian, Sylvia declared, leaning over the table. Kensington Holdings will not do business with a firm that harbors thieves and liabilities. You have 60 seconds to terminate Darien Miller and Chloe Reynolds, effectively immediately, with cause, stripping them of all severance and unvested bonuses. If you do not, I am pulling the waterfront project, the downtown plaza, and I will personally ensure your firm is blacklisted in every commercial real estate market on the East Coast. Adrian Harrison didn't even need 10 seconds. He turned to Darien, his face purple with rage. Darien, you are fired. Clear out your desk. Security will escort you from the building. Chloe, you're done as well. Get out of my sight before I call the police and press charges for the fraudulent expenses. Adrian, you can't. Darien sobbed, completely breaking down. I'll pay it back. I gave 7 years to this firm. You gave nothing, Adrian roared. You used us to fund your pathetic ego. Get out? Darien looked at Sylvia one last time. He saw no mercy. He saw only the cold, hard reflection of a billionaire who had finally taken off her disguise. The 2 security guards who had accompanied Sylvia stepped forward. They grabbed Darien by the arms and hauled him to his feet. As he was dragged out of the glass boardroom, he caught a glimpse of Chloe, furiously packing her briefcase, sobbing uncontrollably. Darien was escorted through the bullpen of the firm. Dozens of junior architects, assistants, and draftsmen, people he had patronized and belittled for years, watched in stunned silence as the once untouchable senior partner walked to the elevators. He was thrown onto the street with nothing but a cardboard box containing a few pens, a desk calendar, and a framed photo of him and Sylvia from their honeymoon. A honeymoon that he now realized Sylvia had quietly paid for. It took exactly 4 months for the final nail to be driven into Darien's coffin. The divorce mediation took place in a sterile, windowless conference room at the downtown courthouse. Darien had managed to secure a sneezy, aggressive family lawyer named Robert Geller, who operated out of a strip mall in the suburbs. Geller had promised Darien the moon. She's a billionaire, Darien. Geller had practically drooled during their consultation. Massachusetts is an equitable distribution state. You were married for 7 years. We are going to take her to the cleaners, alimony, property division, the works. You'll be set for life. Darien had desperately clung to that hope. He was currently living in a dingy, roach-infested studio apartment on the outskirts of the city, working a minimum-wage job at a home improvement store mixing paint, because no architectural firm in the state would hire him after the explosive scandal at Harrison and Partners. When Sylvia entered the mediation room, she looked radiant. She wore a stunning emerald green dress and carried an aura of absolute peace. Richard Sterling walked beside her, carrying a single slim folder. "Let's get right to it," Robert Geller said aggressively, leaning across the table. "My client is seeking a spousal support order of $30,000 a month, given the vast discrepancy in postmarital income. We are also seeking half the value of the Wellington Street townhouse, as it was the marital home, regardless of the shell company that holds the deed." Darien sat silently, staring at his hands. He couldn't even look at Sylvia. Richard Sterling chuckled. It was a dry, rasping sound. He opened his slim folder and slid a single, notarized document across the table to Geller. "Mr. Geller, before you continue embarrassing yourself, I suggest you review the document your client signed precisely 7 years and 2 weeks ago," Richard said smoothly. Geller picked up the document. His aggressive posture slowly deflated as he read the title. Comprehensive Prenuptial Asset Protection and Liability Waiver. What is this? Geller demanded, looking at Darien. You told me you didn't sign a prenup. I didn't, Darien protested weakly. I swear, when we got married, she just had me sign some liability waiver for her freelance bookkeeping business. She said it was just to make sure our taxes didn't get audited together. Ah, yes, the bookkeeping business that was actually a multi-billion-dollar corporate trust, Richard smiled. If Mr. Miller had bothered to read the document instead of assuming his wife was a simpleton who needed him to explain basic finances to her, he would have realized he signed an ironclad waiver. It explicitly states that any assets held by the Kensington Family Trust remain sole and separate property. Furthermore, it includes a strict infidelity clause that nullifies any right to spousal support. Geller's face went pale. He flipped to the back page. There was Darien's signature, loud and clear, right next to Sylvia's. As for the marital debt, Richard continued relentlessly, sliding another stack of papers forward. The $84,000 in credit card debt is solely in Mr. Miller's name. The lease on the Porsche Macan, which has since been repossessed, is solely in his name. Miss Kensington owes him exactly nothing. In fact, we're generously deciding not to sue Mr. Miller for the $42,000 he embezzled from his former firm, which means Kensington's holding company absorbed as a loss. Geller dropped the papers on the table. He looked at Darien with utter disgust. You idiot. You have nothing. The lawyer stood up, packed his briefcase, and walked out of the room, leaving his client behind. Darien was alone. He looked across the table at the woman he had severely underestimated, betrayed, and ultimately lost. Sylvia, Darien choked out, tears finally breaking through his numb exterior. I'm sorry. I am so sorry. I lost my mind. The money, the status, it poisoned me. Sylvia looked at him. There was no anger left in her eyes. There was no sadness. There was only the cold, polite indifference one might show a stranger on a subway. You were always poisoned, Darien, Sylvia said quietly, standing up and smoothing her dress. The money didn't change you. It just revealed who you always were. You wanted a wife you could control, and a mistress you could show off. You thought you were the smartest man in every room. She picked up her designer handbag. You are exactly where you belong, she whispered. With that, Sylvia Kensington walked out of the mediation room, leaving Darien Miller entirely alone in the silence of his ruined life. 6 months later, Sylvia stood on the private balcony of her newly acquired penthouse overlooking the Boston harbor. The city lights glittered below her like scattered diamonds. She held a glass of expensive vintage wine, not because she needed to show off, but simply because she liked the taste. She had sold the Wellington townhouse. It was tainted. Instead, she had poured her energy into a massive charitable foundation, funding architectural scholarships for underprivileged women. As for Darien, the rumors occasionally filtered back to her through Richard. Darien had filed for bankruptcy. He was still mixing paint at the hardware store, living in a cheap apartment and taking the bus to work. Chloe had long since disappeared, reportedly latching onto a tech executive who was significantly older and significantly less patient than Darien. Karma had not just knocked on Darien's door, it had kicked it down, evicted him, and changed the locks. Sylvia smiled, taking a sip of her wine. The city was hers. It always had been. But now she didn't have to hide in the shadows to enjoy it. What a monumental, satisfying crash of karma. Darien thought he was playing a high-stakes game of chess, completely unaware that his wife owned the entire board. There is nothing quite as satisfying as watching a massive ego get absolutely dismantled by the quiet, observant partner they took for granted. Sylvia didn't just get even. She orchestrated a masterclass in total financial and professional annihilation. Let this be a legendary warning. Never underestimate the person standing quietly by your side, and definitely don't try to remodel a house you don't actually own. If you love watching Darien's pathetic house of cards crumble, make sure to like this video, share it with anyone who loves a brilliant revenge story, and subscribe to the channel for more epic tales of karma hitting back hard. What would you have done if you were Sylvia? Sound off in the comments below.